Hi there, my name's Corel, and today we're going to be taking a look at a new game called Meet Your Maker. We're going to be introducing you to some of the basics of how to use the building system, how to operate build effectively, how to make sure it gets kills and raids, and most of all, how to make your builds work. So today we're going to start off by taking a look at everything surrounding the actual building. We're not going to get into actual tricks or traps, we're just going to take a look at everything surrounding that. Alright, so the first thing you need to do in order to start building is to pick a burial site. Do that by going to your command center, hitting the build tab up top, going down to claim new burial site at the bottom. And now you'll see a bunch of different burial sites here. We've got Tecumseh up here in the top left, Slidell in the middle over here, Union Bridge, Goldsboro, so on and so forth. These are named up at the top left. Those names are automatically generated and cannot be changed. You also have a map size, which is over in the right corner. There's a small map here, there's a medium map here, and there's a large map here. Those three different pips indicate the map size. You also have a capacity, which is the amount of traps and blocks that you can place on there. The different traps and guards will all have different costs associated with them. Structural blocks will all cost 1. You also have a synthite cost here, that is the cost to purchase that area. And down the lower left, you can see the type of gen mat that is being generated by this particular map. And then over on the right side here, this number is very, very, very important because this number indicates the pool size for the map. At least that's what I'm calling it. The pool size dictates how long your map will remain active after you claim it and between each prestige level. So you can have a map that is active for up to 24 hours at the 9,000 size that we have over here, but this goes down, I believe, all the way to somewhere around the 3,000 range, and those maps just don't last very long. They only last a few hours. So generally speaking, you want to claim something with as large a pool size as possible. You want to get something with that 9,000 in there. At least currently that is the largest pool size that's available, and so that's what you want to go for. It will make your maps last longer, they will get the opportunity to have more raids, that will get you more prestige points, and that prestige 10 breakpoint is where your outpost turns into a champion outpost, which is something you really want to get. We'll get into that later. Now down at the bottom of the screen, you've also got a list of new burial sites, when those will be available. You've got a refresh button. That's very important. You're going to be using that a lot to find the best outposts. Next up, let's take a look at the difficulty scaling. Difficulty is an interesting topic, and there's a whole lot of math that can go into it, but in general, there's a few basic rules that you need to watch out for. Alright, so if we're talking about difficulty, the first thing to realize is up in the upper right there, you have a readout that says Broomall here is a normal map. You can also see the harvester path there and the minimum defenses. You cannot get a difficulty rating until you have both a harvester path and minimum defenses. You have to check both of those boxes in order to actually be assigned a difficulty. Minimum defenses is recalculated, and harvester path for this matter, are recalculated both every single time you change anything about your outpost. Harvester path will update almost immediately depending on the path length, but minimum defenses can take like 3 to 5 seconds to update, so when you make a change, you need to wait for that. So for instance, if I go over here and remove a trap, you can see that goes orange, and it takes a few seconds, and then we get an update, and we can see we still have minimum defenses. Again, placing a new block, goes orange, we wait, it comes back to yellow. So that takes about 5 seconds to calculate, and that is basically just going through the entire outpost and checking the supposed difficulty of everything that you have in the outpost. Now, as you can see here, we can have a lot of traps in a very normal difficulty map. That sounds great, right? But there's actually some other stuff going on here. Alright, so the first thing of interest here is that the actual capacity cost of the trap plays heavily into the supposed danger rating that comes along with that trap. So for instance, these 30 cost traps don't add very much to the danger rating. We can have a lot of them. Same with the corrosive cubes and hollow cubes. But things like the plasma sentinel cost a bit more. They're going to add more to the danger rating. Things like the bomb trap and incinerator trap are going to add quite a bit. So for instance, if I go over here and add a spike trap, you can see over on the top right, this is going to leave me at normal once it recalculates. However, if I was to go in and add an incinerator trap, you'll see that this will probably kick us right up into dangerous. Yes, because I have set this trap setup up here to kind of prove out this point. So more expensive traps will add more to your danger rating. Another good example here is that traps will actually add more to your danger rating if they have overlapping fields of fire. For instance, if I put a spike trap up here, it's not going to actually kick me over into that dangerous territory because it is not overlapping with any fields of fire. These traps over here can't hit up here where this trap can, so I am still at a normal difficulty base. However, if I remove that and place it down here in front of this flame trap, this same spike trap is going to kick me up into dangerous territory because it's overlapping the field of fire with that flame trap. So you can see they're both going to hit that same square. That means this creates more danger for the raider than it would otherwise, and so the game rates it more heavily. You want to keep this field of fire thing in mind because that will scale up your difficulty rating very quickly if you have a lot of traps concentrated in a small area. Another factor that plays into difficulty rating is the traps crossing with Harvey's pathway. So, you see we've got a bunch of traps here crossing Harvey's pathway. Those are adding more than these traps down here. For instance, if I am to plop down a trap here, you'll see that this takes the outpost to a dangerous rating. However, if I remove that trap and put it back down here, we should go back down to a normal rating once this recalculates. So, yeah, there we go. That proves, then, that traps that cross Harvey's pathway are more dangerous or considered higher difficulty than traps that are placed elsewhere. So, just to prove a point here, I've gone ahead and created a dangerous map. Not very many traps here, are there? This is actually the entirety of the traps on this map. This is all there are, nothing else here. But those few traps have actually kicked the map all the way up into the dangerous difficulty rating because they are all crossing fields of fire that intersect with Harvey's pathway, and they all have 2 mods on them. Mods do play some effect in this, though they don't lend a whole lot of weight to that difficulty calculation. So in general, if you have a really intense room, it's going to add a lot of difficulty rating. If you have just a few traps spread out here and there, and a lot of them aren't facing Harvey's pathway, then you're not going to end up with a very difficult map. So, use that to your advantage, and let's go on to the next section. So let's go ahead and talk next about how to use that difficulty rating. When you're just starting out as a builder, you probably don't want to go with a very difficult map. In fact, you probably want to stick to the normal difficulty. I can do that in this case just by removing one of these traps, and that should kick the difficulty back down to normal. And despite that, we've still got a very flamey little corridor of loopy doom there. Anyway, so that is very, very basic and is still right on that edge of difficult. So it doesn't seem like you can do a whole lot with the normal map, right? Well, you're kind of right there. You can only really fit 1 or 2 really good trap combinations into a normal difficulty map. So you might be thinking, why do I want to start with normal? I want to get kills. Well, yes and no. You're actually in it as much for the accolades as you are for the kills. We'll get into that later, but in general, you want to try and kill the raider in a way that they feel is fair. You can do that with clever trap combinations that people haven't thought of before, or just copying someone else's trap combination if you really feel like going that direction. So generally what you're trying to do is just to build something really, really clever. It doesn't matter how small it is. You want to keep it in that normal difficulty range, because if you have to go above that difficulty range in order to execute a single trap combination, you're probably doing something wrong. So now that we know all the calculations that go into difficulty, let's talk about what you do with it. The first thing you need to know with difficulty is that you're probably going to want to start with a normal map. In fact, you're probably going to want to start with several normal maps before you graduate to the higher difficulties. Limit yourself to those normal maps. You want a few really nasty trap combinations that you've worked all the kinks out of. And the reason that you want to go for normal maps in order to get that library of those really good trap combinations is because you're going to get a lot more raiders. You're going to see a lot more gear combinations, and the raiders are going to have a lot more different strategies because there's just more of them. So you really want to see a lot of those different raiders hit your outpost. You want to see those different combinations. You want to see how your trap and guard combinations react to that swarm of raiders hitting your outpost. And it's really hard to do that if you start out with a brutal outpost, and a lot of them don't even make it to that trap combination. They give up early, or they are extremely experienced raiders that just blow through everything, or they just, in general, aren't going to be that many raiders, so you're just not going to get to see how your trap combinations perform in as many circumstances as you should. So stick with normals until you develop a library of tricks up your sleeve that you've really honed and refined to the point where they will almost always get 1 or 2 kills each. Now, once you get that trap combination, once you get that library going that has a bunch of nastiness in it, stitch those together into a difficult outpost. The difficult outposts are going to let you handle a lot more trap combinations, and that'll give you some practice weaving those different combinations together in ways that aren't just place one room, then place another room, then place a third room after the end of that. You want your trap combinations to lead into each other. So again, you want that library, and then you also want to figure out how to transfer the raider between those two areas easily and effectively. And once you master that art, that kind of gradual progression through the map that keeps drawing the raider further and further in with challenges and really effective combinations at every step of the way, then you're ready for the brutal maps. Because the brutal maps are where you need to tie all that together. When you start making brutal maps, you're going to get a lot of extremely experienced raiders, and those raiders are going to tear through most basic trap combinations. This trap combination that I have here with these flame traps on the walls and ceilings is absolutely nothing to an experienced raider. They'll blow through this in a second. It's not even worth looking at to them. So you need to come up with something that's really going to work before you even attempt to put together a brutal map, or you're just going to get very few raids and very few kills, and that's just not fun. You're wasting resources, you're wasting time. Don't do that. The next topic I want to talk about is tombs. Tombs are these little T-shaped things with skeletons stuck in the wall there, or the floor, and they are always going to be something you want accessible. You never, ever, ever want to block these off. Never. A lot of raiders will absolutely leave your outpost and award 0 accolades if they see you blocking off tombs. Tombs have no downside for you as a builder. There's absolutely nothing wrong with letting the raider get over here. So what you really want to do is mark out the tombs. A lot of raiders will really appreciate if you mark tombs. They'll award you accolades for doing stuff like that. And if you really want to be clever about it, you can work these tombs into your outpost in very, very clever ways, because you don't have to let Harvey path to them. For instance, a tomb can be almost anywhere in here, and if you manage to work that into your level in a really clever or inventive way, like adding a secret passage or making the raider grapple through a corrosive cube, make them think they had to work for that tomb. That sort of creativity is something that raiders will generally heavily encourage. So you want to let the raider get the tomb. It costs you nothing. It gives them resources. They're going to feel happy that they solved the puzzle, which is a much more challenging puzzle than the straight path that a Harvey has to be able to take to get to the gen mat. And so, really, there is no downside. You are more likely to be able to prestige your outpost when you get the accolades. We'll talk about that again later. And the raider is happy at the end of your outpost. They're more likely to raid your other outposts. Really, it's a win-win situation. Do not block your tombs. Always leave them accessible. If you can, try and build them into your level. The next thing for today is Harvey pathing. Harvey likes flat surfaces. He can't walk on anything else. He has to walk all the way along on flat surfaces. You can use ramps, but he generally has to stay on a flat surface. You can alter Harvey's pathway by removing and adding blocks, and that's fine as long as he has an actual pathway to end up at the gen mat somehow. He has to get from the starting area to the gen mat and back out. You can't block that off in any way, shape, or form. If I put a block there, Harvey's path breaks. Doesn't work. However, there are some oddities to Harvey's pathing. There are some things that look very exploitable. They aren't necessarily. Harvey still has to have that walkable pathway, but there are some really weird things you can do with paths. The simplest of the things that you can do with a Harvey pathway is just to run it up and down some weird slopes. That tends to confuse raiders. It keeps them from seeing just a straight ahead path, and it keeps Harvey's movement a little less predictable. That can be very valuable in a lot of cases. It can force the raider into areas where you can trap corners. For instance, if I push this log over here, I can do something weird like having a dart trap over in this corner, and that will fire at the raiders as they attempt to cross that pathway unless they jump over the gap. So you can do a lot of weird and interesting things with those pathways, and as long as Harvey can walk through it, he will still cross. Now, if I attempt to remove a block here, Harvey's going to complain about that. He can't cross that little gap there. So you have to have at least a certain width of path there before you'll be able to path across. And you also cannot have anything that looks like an overhang that is too low. So if I put that there, Harvey's going to complain. Could Harvey physically fit through this gap over here? Yes, he could. There's definitely a way that he could walk there. But he won't try because he is programmed to never go under these 45-degree overhangs. This is clearer if I put this over here. He can't go under this overhang in any circumstance. If I use the prism instead of the pyramid, or rather the prism instead of the triangle there, you can see it does the same thing. His path is going to break right there. In general, those 45-degree overhangs that I mentioned are the leading cause of questions that I see about Harvey's pathing breaking. There will inevitably be someone that's done something like this, and it won't work. Please do note that you can pull some really weird shenanigans like this, and that is fine, because despite there being that 45-degree overhang, there's also a divot in the ground here so that Harvey is going down at the same time that overhang is. So this is fine, you can do this, but you can't do is that. This again has that 45-degree overhang above a flat surface. That's never going to work. Another weird trick you can pull is with second wave traps. Now normally, if I take this block out, Harvey can't path across it, right? Yeah, that's perfectly expected. If we take a hollow cube here and put it in place, Harvey still can't path across that. It's not a solid block. If I make this a second wave trap, Harvey still can't path across it because it's not a solid block, even though that second wave and Harvey can cross that, at least until I pick up the gem mat. He can't cross back after I've picked up the gem mat, so he's still going to complain about it. So what good is that? You can't exactly do anything with that, right? Well, not exactly. You can actually exploit this in some circumstances. Because what we can do here is drop in another entrance, and if we wander back over here and make sure that Harvey can cross here, these 45-degree slopes are a perfectly valid path, Harvey's path will adjust over here. Now, what good does that do, you might ask? This just makes Harvey go a different path. Why is that useful? Well, this is more apparent if we actually go in and test the map. If we run over here, Harvey runs this way. This goes back to Harvey's pathing logic. Harvey will run the shortest possible distance to the gem mat at any given available time. If he gets off course for any reason and can't make it back to his next destination, he will repath. This is a second wave hollow cube. It's solid. He can walk across it for now. So what he's going to do is walk across that and go get the gem mat. If I am to pick this gem mat up, that hollow cube becomes incorporeal, so it's not walkable anymore. He can't walk across that. And now, instead of coming back this way, Harvey will actually go back all the way around. Alright, so we've made our masterpiece of an outpost. Now we want to get people to rate it. How do we do that? Well, that's where the various different outpost states come in. The inactive state is where everything defaults to. Everything will start out inactive. When you claim a new outpost, it comes into the inactive state, and it will stay there until you activate it. No one will raid anything in the inactive state. It's just there so that you have a place to build up on your outpost and get it ready to go. So where you really want to be is the active or overdrive states. And we'll talk about these two different states in a moment, but first I want to call your attention over here to this pool size. You can see over here on this pool size we have 9,000 gen mat. That means we can pull 9,000 gen mat for the weapons advisor out of this specific outpost. Moreover, since this is a weapons advisor outpost in the normal size, that is the specific gen mat provider and outpost difficulty that we are going to find this outpost if we were to activate it for matchmaking. You also need to know that this pool size is dictating this value down here, which is actually very hard to see. It's kind of hidden. This time before depletion here is set to 23 hours and 59 minutes. The lower your pool size is, the less time you have before your outpost will deplete. Note that while you're in an inactive state, your outpost does not deplete, so you don't need to worry about that. It only starts depleting once you set it to the active state. The next state we want to look at is the active state. In order to change an outpost from inactive to active, you first have to meet all of these activation criteria over here on the right. You can see we've got a harvester path, you can see we've got gen mat available, you can see we've got minimum defenses. What I don't have available is an activation slot. I can only have 5 active outposts at once. Active includes both the active and overdrive. You can see this kind of box around here indicating that these are both activated states. This activation slot, every outpost that is in one of these two states will require 1 activation slot. You only get 5. So, since I already have 5 active outposts, I can't actually activate this one. I can still go ahead and click this, and it will still let me do it, but if I go and exit this outpost, it will not be activated because I haven't met all the activation criteria. Active is the default stance that says raid me. This is going to put your outpost out in front of everyone, so you want to make sure you've got all the details fine-tuned before you actually set your outpost to active, because you're only going to get so many raiders, and you want them all to have the best experience possible. Again, you want those kills, you want those accolades, and both of those are going to come from your outpost being the best that it can be. So don't worry too terribly much about the activation state, though. You generally aren't going to care too much if a couple of raiders have a bad experience or find a hole in your level or something like that. What you really want to avoid is just leaving it up for a long period of time with it in a terrible, terrible state. Look through your level, make sure everything's in order before you activate it, but if a raider or two manages to go through and find that one block that you forgot to fill in, not too big of a deal. You'll live. The next active state I want to talk about is overdrive. Overdrive will make your outpost active. Players will still be able to raid it. However, overdrive will cause you to lose 300 gen mat from this pool over here every time a player successfully grabs that gen mat objective and escapes with it. You'll get 100% more gen mat from them each time you kill them. However, they will steal from your pool size, and that is terrible. When a raider gets into the gen mat and makes it out with that 300 gen mat, they've effectively reduced the lifespan of your outpost by some amount of time. The way this plays out is that the outpost has an extraction rate of right now about 375 gen mat per hour. So if you have 300 gen mat stolen from you, it shaves off just about an hour of lifespan from your outpost. So this outpost is going to be alive for 24 hours. If I get, say, 30 raids and I have this in overdrive in the first minute, and they all steal 300 gen mat, my outpost is done. It's gone. I've gotten those 30 raids, that's all it's going to get. And that's not what you want most of the time. You want time for your prestige points to accumulate up so that you can keep your outpost alive for longer. The final state we want to look at here is social. Now, social will make a raid active, but not in the actual matchmaking. Rather, people can search for your name or the outpost's name and come up with that outpost and be able to wander through it pretty much at their leisure. No one gets any rewards from this. You're not going to get gen mat extracted from the outpost. You won't get gen mat from kills. You won't get resources like synthite or parts from kills that are lit around the map. But everyone can search and find your map. So that's what this is there for. This is mostly just so that you and your friends can find and challenge each other's maps. It's not really an active state, and you can't have friends search for and find your maps while they're in active or overdrive. So you have this social backup as kind of a thing that I tend to turn on after Prestige 10, which is the cap. But the general consensus is that you want to take social as kind of a fun extension of your outpost's lifespan. It's not really a serious mode for the main body of the game. Alright, so let's take a look at the Prestige tab next. Now, the prestiging is kind of the subject of a lot of debate and back and forth going on and discussion about the game. Probably the thing that the people have the most complaints about over all of Meet Your Maker right now is how prestiging works. So take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. Behavior Interactive might change some of this stuff, but as of launch, this is how prestiging works. So you've got your prestige level over here. This goes from 1 to 10. Once you hit prestige level 10, you can't prestige your outpost any further, and at the end of the gen mat extraction cycle at prestige 10, your outpost is just dead. It can be put into social raid mode, but you can't actually put it into active mode anymore, not into that rotation. So you've got a thing over here that says the next prestige rewards you with an additional 175 build capacity. So as I prestige the outpost, I can get more and more build capacity, and I can add more and more traps. That's of debatable usefulness, because as you're prestiging an outpost and getting more and more build capacity, there's a limit on what you can do with that, right? It's still going to become a dangerous outpost if I add more traps to an already high-tier normal outpost. The next column over here breaks down how many kills you've gotten, how many accolades you have, and how many of your prestige points are coming from kills and accolades respectively. Generally speaking, accolades are worth more than kills. A single accolade is worth several kills, like 4 or 5, something along that line. So accolades are something that you really want to chase. You want to make sure and mark your tombs. You want to make sure that your outpost looks good. You want to make sure that the traps are clever and not just thrown on every single possible surface, because you don't want the outpost to look lazy. That will get you more accolades, which in turn gets you more prestige points, which makes it easier to prestige up to level 5. Prestige level 5 is very important for one reason. Once you get there, your outpost will become a champion outpost. Champion outposts right now don't have a tie to a specific advisor. So the GenMat extraction over on the right side here won't apply anymore to how your map gets shown to the raiders once you hit champion outpost. Rather, raiders will go through your champion outpost and it will be automatically assigned to them. So you tend to get a lot more raids once you hit that champion outpost. So that is really a target that you want to aim for, and everything leading up to Prestige 5 is more or less just trying to get you into that champion outpost state. Now, looking down at the Prestige button on the right, you'll notice that that has a synthite cost. Building is pretty expensive on the synthite. It's kind of painful, actually. Prestiging is expensive, and this number only goes up as you go up in prestige tiers. However, you only have to do this once every 24 hours or so. If you raid a few maps here and there, you'll likely get enough synthite to keep prestiging your outposts. But you have to do that for every single one of your outposts. So if I have 5 outposts, I'm going to actually need to do quite a bit of raiding in order to keep the synthite, in order to keep prestiging all of them and keep them alive. So that can take quite a bit of work. I believe Behavior Interactive is also looking at the prestige costs and potentially going to play with some numbers there, but again, we don't really have any solid information on that yet. So that's all for today. We've gone over how to select a plot, we've gone over how difficulty scaling works, what difficulties you want to start with and work towards, what to do with tombs, we've gone over Harvey pathing, we've gone over activation statuses, and we've gone over the prestiging system. So taking all of that together, that's everything around the actual building. Next time we'll get into some actual building and start looking at some trap combinations and the various different nuts and bolts of how each of the traps and guards works. But for now, that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.